the idea of the talk or the title as well is keep only those privileges that speaks to your heart. Instead to create like a joke with the cleanup of the process in Active Directory. Will be the main goal of the talk. Find a way to understand what we are doing and how we can clean the Active Directory and explain how hard it is. At the beginning, this will be your journey. Here, first, it was already mentioned, we have to really understand that we have a problem, because sometimes we are not even aware of that. Later, we will try to understand the problem, like the concept of it on it, and how it affects us. We will try to put some order on these problems. We will realize that we have not one problem, we have a lot of problems. We'll have to find a way to put like a score on it, and we will iterate over it. In the moment that we have more data, we will ask the same questions again and again and enriching the data. And at some point, we will have enough information to try to help others. In this case, will be kind of a spoil to operations team, no? Because in the moment that we have the information, we have to try to help others, giving context to solve it. And at the end, I put it like pray and or annoy, because at some point we have to keep an eye on all these things. But let's continue. This is myself. I'm Luis. I'm coming from Belgium. I'm Spanish living in Belgium. I work in the European External Action Service, and before I was doing almost the entire path of the blue teamer, incident response, forensic analysis, help desk. I would do the threat hunting. I was doing everything, and now I'm in kind of IT management part. That's the step right now. Okay, let's realize that we have a problem. This is a normal day for one of us. And then a manager or an auditor comes to us and asks, how many admins do we have in our system? The answer is like this, like, okay, what do you mean? What do you mean with that? Domain admins, schema admins, local admins, we have too many admins. What do you mean with that? And then you continue thinking, the manager is there waiting for your number, was expecting like this, something like 200. And then you realize that you don't even understand what it means. You don't even realize what admin means. And at some point, it's what we are, I mean, what we're really thinking. And then this blows your mind, and you understand that we have a problem. If you are not able to answer a question like this, we are not able to say how risky is a user in our environment, we have a really problem. Now we try to understand better the problem, okay? Something super into the cybersecurity. You know that you have a problem. And then what do? You go to the market, you search for the nicest tool in the market. But what is the reality? One colleague told me a long time ago that if you think that solution to a problem is only technical, you are not really understanding the problem. And this at that point, for someone that's coming from, someone like me that's coming from a really technical background, was really shocking. I said, well, maybe this is true. And a sentence that I love, a fool with a tool is still a fool. And it's important to understand this, because we have this tendency to create tools. I'm presenting a tool, by the way. But the idea is that we think that we can solve everything with tools, and it's not true. At the end, we fail miserably because of this approach. And then let's try to understand the problem, no? We have a lack of knowledge, a huge lack of knowledge in the corporations normally. Even if everybody uses Active Directory, it's hard to find people that really understand what is the consequences, how we are inheriting rights, what are the consequences. Excessive rights by default. We have some applications that are crazy giving rights. When you deploy a new tool, a new service in your environment, by default, the company is telling to you, give these rights, configure these groups, you need to be like this. And by default, they are overprivileged, and this is not needed in the majority of the cases. And for sure, nobody understands the impact in case of compromise. So much go on. I say it like this because obviously, and it's normal, the companies have the focus in operations. Everything has to work, and it's normal. But this excessive approach is giving, if everybody's domain admin, everybody will run perfectly. This is for sure. If everybody's local admin, nobody will complain. But we have to try to find a balance in these points. And for sure, securizing Active Directory is really time demanding and complicated, and nobody wants to do it. Another problem that we have, the lack of tools. The native tools that coming from Microsoft are not designed at all to do this, are designed to give rights. you can give. But remove, it's really complicated to understand. There are some tools focusing compliance, that is like things that you have misconfigurations, but not because the approach of knowing the overprivileged users is really complicated. They have not the focus on that. Now some EDRs are starting in this direction, start talking about escalation paths, and for sure we have BloodHound, finally BloodHound Enterprise, with what I consider a better approach to solve these kind of issues. But what is the reality? That at the end we have something like this, doesn't matter how big it's our domain, we'll have thousands of users, thousands of groups, millions of connections, and we need a way to find from where we have to start. Now let's understand our problem, because this is the general problem. Everybody has this problem. And now let's try to achieve how this applies to our environment. First thing to do, install BloodHound. Now it's easier than ever. Install BloodHound, collect the data. And I love this, Andy Robbins wrote this article about things that you have to solve, maybe not in the first day, but in the first week. Things that you have to search, because things like that is out of the article, it's a reality. It's a reality. When you deploy BloodHound and you search for the first escalation path, this is a reality, and these things that you have to solve. I mean, and this is the moment to overrule everyone. This is the moment to go to the highest management and say, I don't care about what's the opinion of operations. This is something that you have to solve. Later in the last year, we had this talk about how BloodHound is approaching this solution in a longer way, no? Because these few things that you can solve fast are like this, is nice, but then you have a way more problems that you have to find, and they are more complicated to find. But for those, I mean, I'm trying to use my own approach. In this case, I will use as well the data coming from BloodHound, but using in the context of a Jupyter notebook, Python, pandas, and Plotly to generate some graphs. Let's try to see how we can enrich the data and we can understand better what is happening. This is the information that BloodHound is collecting. And something that I want to highlight is this access control entries. I want you to remember this part because we will use it later. Because what is important in this case is when you ingest this data in BloodHound, you lose the access control entries. BloodHound is using these access control entries to generate what we consider maybe more valuable at some point, that are the controllables, the controllers, the system that is telling to you if you are part of the tier 0 or not. It's using this, but you lose it. And we will use it at the end. And then with the approach that I'm following, it's first you scan with BloodHound, you process these JSON files, because it's way faster than asking BloodHound for all of this data. You process all this data. You start asking BloodHound for the extent attributes that they know that are valuable for you. You put all of this together and you create a pandas data frame. I don't know if you are used with this technology, but it's like if you are still working with CSV files in Excel, please search, Google pandas data frame and start working with it, because you are living in the 80s, okay? And I'm super in love with pandas, I have to confess. It solved in the past a lot of problems that I had analyzing data. And in this case, at this point, we have a huge improvement. We have all the data with all the attributes, and we can start playing with the data. We can start filtering, we can put some aggregations, we can start doing nice things. And at this point, you will really understand way better what is happening in your domain, because you can start saying, what are the users that can control more objects? And this simple question that sounds like ridiculous, that everybody need to know in your domain, what are the riskiest users just based on the amount of objects that they can control, there is not another way to do. Or you do this something like that, asking BloodHound for all of them and sort in some way, or you cannot do it. And it's really basic thing. But for sure, this is a basic thing. Let's try to make this more professional. Now, this is not a topic for a talk until now. Let's try to make it way more professional, because even here, we will have millions of things to solve. What will be the process that I'm following in this notebook? First, we have all the data that I said. No? We have all the attributes to really understand what is happening. I will ask for every user the attack path to domain admin to BloodHound. Using the API, I will take this data and I will count the number of steps that you need to go to domain admin. What is my understanding? That if you need 2 steps to go to domain admin, it's quite probable that this is a desired configuration. You are kind of domain admin, you're kind of IT admin. But if in your path are 30 steps, I think nobody was expecting that you will escalate to domain admin at some point in this way. It's something that you have to solve. And here I'm putting a higher score. The more steps, the higher score. Second one, how many users or how many groups are using you to escalate to domain admin? Super important point. Because if you have escalation path, but as well, another 3,000 users are using you to escalate to domain admin, okay, I need to solve you first. Generous group. What I'm doing here, I'm calculating the number of controllables that a group has and the number of controllables that the members of the group have. Why this is important? Because if they are the same, what it means that the group is giving the rights to the users. And then it means that you are the cause of the privilege of the users. And then it means that you are a group that I want to solve first as well. I normalize the data. Why? You are doing some analytics. When you are talking about attack paths, you are talking about thousands of objects. When you are talking about escalation, you are talking about a few hundreds. If you are talking about generous group, and then what I do in this case is put a number between 0 and 1, taking into account the maximum, the minimum, and then I can start playing with all the data at the same point because all of them are similar. I play with the weights. This was something that I understood later because every environment is different, and you have to really understand how your company is applying different type of settings. And at this point, you have like a few tens of attributes, and you have to start playing with the weights to really fit what's the risk score will be in your environment that makes sense for you. And for sure, as was mentioned before, we will assign a risk to the user. No? And at this point, we will have every user, every week, every group with a risk score. And this is important because, as was mentioned before, attackers thinking graph. No? You only need one path to escalate to domain admin. But as a defender, you really need to solve all of them. And because it's impossible, because you will have millions of escalation paths, you have to prioritize. You have to go to a list. At the end, you have to take the graphs, the information that you take from the graphs, put it in a table, sort them by priority, and you have to start because it's really time demanding. And you cannot waste your time in things that you consider that were abused in the last red team, thinking that this is the most risky thing, because maybe it was not. Maybe it was just the one that the attackers were using or the red team was using. But you need to really try to go deeper, try to understand further. At this point, what I'm using to calculate the risk is you have controllables, the number of objects that you can control, the number of objects that can control you, path to domain admin, number of edges that I mentioned, as well the number of sessions for users. For sure, if you have sessions because you are an IT admin and because you are running a script everywhere, your session is everywhere, this matters. You have to try to solve this thing as well. And for the groups, I'm using as well the number of members that the group has, because it's also important. Something nice that you can do in a Jupyter notebook is playing with widgets. We are used to work with scripts that are command line scripts that are messy, that you cannot really share with other people that are not that technical. What was my approach with the Jupyter notebook? I think it's a good part. You can create menus like this. You can really abstract the user from the code. And it makes that not only you, like the creator of the notebook, can use it, you can share it, and without really have to understand what the code is doing, you can start playing with the data. And it's really nice. Now, Let's try to understand our problem again. Now we have way more information. Now we have all this extend data about what is happening for every user, and we have the risk score. But let's try to go deeper. Let's try to find if this score is what we need or if it's really working as we expect. Another part that I will show you later, that I will just to show it later if there's no time for the demo, that I think it will be, is this kind of, I'm generating graphs with it. And you can search, you can select a column to filter the data, to not graph 10,000 of points. Nobody wants that, your computer neither. And you can filter the data. You can select what you want in the X axis or in the Y, and you can put some color. And at the end, you will have things like that. You will have like a graph telling you where are the number of controllables, the number of controllers. And for sure, in this case, it was kind of obvious in this example. If you control a lot of objects and a lot of objects can control you, not good, not good. Another example, the number of sessions that you have with the number of controllables. Here it's nice because you can play. The good part of this, you can play with the different attributes that you have, paint a graph, see how the risk score is doing in your graph, makes sense for you, go back to the weights, move the weights in the way that you want, and let's see if this is making sense for you or not at this point. And this case as well is the number of controllables and the number of sessions. As I said, it's important to take into account. At this point, you did a good job. Congratulations, you have like a table full of, I want to put the video because it's one of my favorite videos. I don't know if I can do it. Yes. You can go to the machine of the auto, oh, sorry. Oops. You can go to the machine of the auto complement, give you like this. Nobody will do it for you, I'm sure. And what is happening here? You are, as was mentioned in the previous talk, you are communicating a problem. And from the security point of view, like, it's done, it's done. It's not my issue anymore. If it's a problem, I can write you a 5-page report saying why this user is bad, how many objects can control, how many escalation paths or whatever. But what is the reality? That when you communicate this, it's not enough. And now this is why I said, let's go further and let's try to help others. And for that, we need to understand the problem. Again, I'm sorry, I'm repeating me like it's that, but it's true. I mean, now that we have more information, that we know how the risk is applied and it fits our company, and we know that the user is problematic, we really have to understand that we still don't know why. What is the root cause of this user is not as we expect. For example, this is an example. This bad guy has 73,000 of controllables. The escalation path is really long. But when you communicate this to operations, they will tell you, okay, thank you. But how can I solve it? I say, okay, the most probable thing is that this user is inheriting the rights from a group. And then you go to BloodHound, you search for the membership of the group, and then you have like a beautiful graph with hundreds of groups that are this group is member of. And there's like how you can know from where this user is inheriting the rights. And then you can go to BloodHound and start clicking on all of them and saying what are the amount of controllables that each group has. You can spend a week there to searching for the one that is the guilty, or the one of the 20 that is the guilty ones. But at this point, because we have the entire data, we have the users, we have the group, it's super easy to do. What do? Let's cross the data, no? Let's scroll the data, see all the list of the memberships of the user, and let's check where are the controllables of these users. And this is a super normal example. You have 300 groups that this user is member of, but just a few of them are given rights. Now you really have to understand if this is something desirable or not. For sure, you need a context. You need to really go back and see if you understand your domain. You can go to operations as well and say, it's normal that this user is part of domain admins or administrators, or what is this last group, that admin group that nobody knows, was created 20 years ago and is still there. It's normal that the user is part of this group or it's not. At least you have data. You are suggesting part of the solution. Part. Why? Because what is happening as well, when you have the group and say, this group is providing rights. Next question, why? Why? I mean, if I want to solve, I don't want to remove this user from this group. What I can do further, what can be further solution? And this is part of the issue, how the objects in Active Directory are inheriting these rights from another objects. And how Active Directory works, at the end, you are inheriting all the rights, but it's an end-to-end check. When you try to access this object, it's go to the access control entry database, the access control entry list, and it's checking if you are part of it. But it doesn't matter if it's like a explicit right, if it's inherent from the root of the domain or whatever. Active Directory doesn't care. But you care, because if you want to solve it, you need to know where all these rights are configured. And for that, you have this tool that is when you go to Active Directory, you check security, it's like advanced security settings, you would see the list of the access control entries. And at this point, you know from the user, all the objects in the domain that can have some kind of right over the objects. Can be something like full control, can be something really granular, and it's okay. But we have not a way to do the opposite. Now it's the user, the rights that you receive the rights, but not the opposite. It's like how many rights a user have. I mean, it has, and this is what we want at this point. No, you want to clean a user, you want to see how you can reduce the rights of this user. You have to go in the opposite direction. And actually, correct me if I'm wrong, I never found something like this. This is why this information coming from BloodHound and try to mix all this data in a data frame is really worth it. Because we can search for it. We can now do the opposite. You can go through all the objects, check all the access control entries, and create like what I'm doing is creating a dictionary, like an inverse dictionary, creating with all the entries in the opposite way. And this is really useful because at this point, you will go to operations and you will say, I want to solve this user is a risky user. Why? Because it's this part of this group. And why this being part of this group is a problem? Because it's configured in a lot of places. And what is happening, I don't know if you can read it, but it's an example, this is a laboratory. But what is really common is that you have the users configured in a lot of places. Some cases in the root of the domain, some cases is in a OU, some cases in a printer, in a completely far delegation. And the only way to know it is going to all of them. And what happened as well, for me in the past, is that you want to solve something, you remove a user from a group, and later you check again, you scan again your domain, and nothing changed, because there is another group. There is another you, there is another. And when you spend so much time trying to convince operations, in this case, or management, that you have to clean something, and at the end you realize that it was a waste of time because the risk is still there, it matters. I mean, you need to really understand what you are proposing and knowing that it will solve the problem. And then at this point, you are right, it's true, you did well. Now you really know what is the cause of that this user was a risky user. And now you can feel better. Maybe someone else will give you the hand in your shoulder saying, okay, thank you because you help us. Not only identifying the risk, also explaining how we can solve it. And now the last part of the process will be like this, pray and or annoy. It's obvious that this is our mission. It's not the mission for anyone else. Our mission is to identify and fix. And we have to keep in mind that for the rest of the teams, it's not their mission. And we have to keep an eye. We have to really forget about this approach on my goal is to identify something, generate a report, and forget. It's not my issue anymore. It's your issue. And you have to continue. And it's like this sentence, like people don't do what you expect, but what you expect. But it sounds kind of rude, but you can do it softer, saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And this is the reality. We have to try to go along with the other teams related with operations, because if we understand each other, we will make this way more possible, that we can solve these things. And we cannot forget about this, because we have the vision always super focused in the cyber part. We are super proud of ourselves, and we have to open the mind in these regards. We have to really try to understand operation, because if not, nothing will change. And this is a reality, I will tell you. Doesn't matter how good is your tool, how good is the report that you create, everything will be eternal. Now the demo, let me show you the work note. In this case, I already published it in my GitHub. I publish as well with a kind of CSVs that are with my laboratory data. If you don't want to deploy an Active Directory, you create it with, in this case, I have a few thousands of users with a lot of misconfigurations. You can just go to you can download it and run it locally in your Jupyter Lab, or you can open it in Colab, because there is, just to say it here, like there's a mismatch between how Colab and Jupyter Lab locally is working to show graphs. If the graph is not showing properly, or ping me, because now it's designed to work in Colab, but you want to run it locally, tell me, and maybe I will publish it in the next days, a version to run locally with showing the graphs as is expected. First, why is amazing notebooks, Jupyter notebooks? I don't know if you are used to work with them. You can document, you can put context in the notebooks, that when you're creating a script, at the end, nobody wants to use your scripts because you don't really understand what is happening. And also, you lost the context and all the attributes. If you want to do something complex, it's so complex at the end. Then at this point, what I did, I interacting with the API of BloodHound. I create the functions. I create like a client for that, instrumentalizing the majority of the functions that you have in the API to ask for controllers, controllables, membership, all of this. But the idea is to make it kind of transparent for the user, for the user of the notebook. At this point, you can put this. If you are tend to copy the key, token key or whatever, do it. It's a BPS that is for the laboratory, and play with it. I will love if you play with the laboratory as well. And what I'm doing at this point, I'm processing all the data. Usually, in my case, depending on your computer and where BloodHound is deployed, it will take like half an hour per 1,000 of users to have all this aggregation of the data that you need. And at the end, you will have the data frames in Pandas with all the data. What I'm doing as well, I'm saving this in a CSV file to use it later, because also what I realized is you are working with this every day. You don't need to scan everything every day. You save it in like CSV file, you load it locally, and in half a second, you have the entire data ready to work again in all this information. At this point, we have a data frame for users, and this is the case, with all the columns, with all the attributes that we will receive from SharpHound, and later we enrich with BloodHound. Here, we can start playing. In this case, the laboratory is 1,700 users, and we can do simple search for how many users have an escalation path bigger than 0. And in this case, this laboratory is pretty crappy. We have like more than 600 users with a way to escalate to domain admins. This stats part is something that I'm playing with. The idea is that every time that you analyze the data, you have like kind of statistics, and you can see how everything is changing over the time. This is to give you some kind of good feedback, thinking or seeing that the things are improving. But it's not working well, but it will improve in the next days. For the risk turner, this is what I mentioned before. These are the sliders, and you can play with them. You don't need to understand how it's happening in the background. You are assigning weights. Some cases it's more simple and more complicated, but it's just to click on turn risk and it's happened. And then you have users. You have a risk score here. What I did as well is create not only a risk score, also how much riskier each user is in the entire domain. I mean, if you have 10,000 users and one single user suppose the 1% of the risk of your domain, wow, it's a lot. And then it's to give you you can compare users taking into account how risky they are for your entire domain. Another menu that I was creating with widgets is try to work with the data. Now you have a huge data frame, thousands of lines, and if you don't go to, or you can ask ChatGPT for pandas queries or whatever, it's working really well as well. But if you don't want to do that, I create this kind of menu. You can go here and say, okay, I want to know the highest, okay. For the controllables, the highest 300. I want to know that the escalation path is higher than 0. And as well, I want to filter out admin accounts because in your environment, admin accounts are admin / whatever. And then you can search for name patterns, filter out or include. You want to filter them and you want to know only in admins, you can filter this as well. And then you can have like a smaller group of users at this point. As well for groups. And to graph the data, that I love to work with graphs, okay? I think it's really important because to have tables is nice. At the end, we will need a table from where we have to start, but to understand the data, you need the graphs. You need to work with it. And what you can do here is filter for the first 5,000 users that with the highest risk. You can search for controllers, controllables, and put the color as well. Well, I missed. In the risk. Then you generate the graph. And you have something like this. And also it's nice that with Plotly, you can go to the user and see what is the user. It's not just a point in the graph. It's for me, it's really fun. You can export this like an image as well. Also, what I'm doing, I'm generating another data frame with the filter data. If you want to reduce the scope of your research, you can try to go there as well. Same, another graph for groups. And the origin of the rights. As we were saying before, and I showed to you, what I created here like in a small, simple menu where you put where the origin of the group, you put the user, and it's what it's doing, it's going to all the groups, it's filtering the members, it's searching for where are you member of, and sorting them by the number of privilege or the risk that these groups suppose. For example, here you see there is like something that is not nice for me because we were not assigning a proper weight to the groups. You see here, pre-Windows 2000 compatible access, whatever it means, has a huge risk. Even if they cannot control objects. Why this is happening? Because probably all the users are part of this group. And because in the membership, we are taking into account the amount of users that the group has, we are destroying the risk score because it's like huge. It's the group with most users in the domain. I mean, like it will be like a 1 assigning the score. But we have to think that maybe in our environment, we want to reduce the weight of this score. And then this risk score will change. Shortest path to users, I did it just for fun. If you want to know the shortest path, go to BloodHound. It's nice here. It's very just to show you that all the things that are possible with the widgets and also in the Jupyter notebooks. I put this like an examples. And you can see the graph here. Maybe you don't want to, you are in the notebook and you want to continue there. You want to understand what is happening. You can do it. It's not as nice and as BloodHound, but it works. Now, as we said, we want to know the origin of the writes, right? And then because we have a user, we know that in the escalation path, we know that from this user, you can take control of this one. And we want to know why. Why? Because it doesn't mean that the first user that can control the other has an explicit access control entry in the destination. It's not like this. So often the rights are inherent from another place, and we don't know from where. Okay. At this point, we know that we have to go to the root of the domain. That is where this the first group in this case is configured with generic all on the entire domain. And in this case, all the objects in the domain will inherit this attribute. And now we understand better why this group can control this user. And the last part is, as I saw in the presentation, try to understand all the places where a user, a group is configured. And then this is cool because, as we said, we don't need tables when you're an attacker. Probably you need to know only what is the fastest way. But like a defender, you have to go to this table and start from the beginning and checking where all of these are configured and remove all of them. And just to mention, I'm playing as well in this case with machine learning, artificial intelligence, but the results for the moment are not so good. Let's see in the future. It's just one recommendation. If you are not doing data analytics, do first data analytics and worry about artificial intelligence in the future. Next, when you solve all the things that you discover with data analytics, maybe in 5 or 10 years, you can start worrying about artificial intelligence. But now maybe it's not the moment. Let's go back to the presentation. Let's try to sum up. Even if I put a lot of effort in the application, it's important to keep in mind the first part. We have to educate our admins. Usually they have the focus in operations. They want to work. It's a legit reason, but we have to educate. We have to create policies. If you don't have the support of a paper signed by management, it's complicated to make sometimes people to understand that this is necessary. Something that sounds ridiculously understandable, the project admin doesn't mean Active Directory admin. You create a project, you need some rights in the project. It doesn't mean that you need rights in the objects in the domain. But this is also super common to see. Temporary rights, try to document it, try to see what you are giving, for how much time, and go back to it. Create process for that. This is really necessary because usually what we have a mess everywhere because nobody is removing rights. And at the beginning, you really understand, but after 10 years, nobody remember why they were given these rights and nobody wants to remove them. Right segregation is nice. For me, it's not a problem to generate new accounts for a week, for a day. It's better to generate new accounts than giving rights to accounts all the time. Use data visualizations and try to help others. Really, I put a lot of effort on stressing this part, but I want to sum up as well this part. And if I have to really summarize everything in a sentence, if you don't know your domain, nobody will do it for you. From the security point of view, I mean, we were disconnected from this part. We love to see that this configuration was not good, that you can escalate in this way, but we are not really understanding what is happening in our domain because it's complex and it takes time. Also, it's boring. But it's fancier to really understand a new technique, how attack, how abuse your domain. But this part is necessary. And if you don't do it, nobody will do it for you. And this is just the end. If you have any questions, I will be super happy to answer. Or do we have time, right? This is why I said it. Okay. Yes, now it's completely offline because it works like that. You can deploy BloodHound in your environment in a virtual machine. I was doing it even in big environments with a few gigabytes of memory, with a few CPUs, and you can work with it really easy. You can just have the notebook and the virtual machine. They have to have connection for sure. But it's completely offline. At this moment, it's nothing related with cloud. I deployed the machine in the cloud just to be sure that here is working, just like a backup. But It's meant to work on-prem. Yes, the difference here is that the notebook, when you will print the graph, because something really messy in Jupyter Notebook. I love Jupyter. I hate myself talking bad about Jupyter Notebooks. But the reality is that how you play with the outputs is really complicated, and you have to nest output from output, and at some point it's a mess. And how Colab work with the outputs is a different way. And then I will publish the same version. It will be exactly the same notebook, but with 3 or 4 different lines. And I will do it. And I will put it like this is the version for Colab, and this is the version to run it in Jupyter Lab in your computer. I will do it. I promise.
One more question.
BloodHound Enterprise or only Community Edition?
Now I'm using only Community Edition. At this point, because one of the requirements was to use it on-prem, and BloodHound Enterprise for the moment is cloud. This was one of the needs that I had at that point. But I wanted to work with that, and it's completely the open source version of the Community Edition of BloodHound.
Some of the APIs should potentially be.
Yeah, it is. I think that all the APIs that you have in the Community Edition are in the Enterprise. I mean, if you have the Enterprise, you can do exactly the same, I guess. It should work. And maybe even you have more data to include in your data frame. It would be nice to try. If you want maybe to have some, with the risk score, for example, that I present this proposal like in December. I think it was in January or February that was released the new feature in BloodHound with the risk score. And I was like, what? But it's true that it's there. Maybe you don't need to calculate. You can compare both. It will be super nice to see. What is the risk score that you are receiving from BloodHound Enterprise, and what is the risk score that you are giving, and try to understand why it's different. It will be super nice to know.
Awesome. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you very much.